and welcome to Always Take Notes.
A message from our sponsor, Writing Magazine. If you've always wanted to write, but never known how to start, or if you've already got a book under your belt, Writing Magazine is just what you need to practice, develop, and publish your written work.
Filled with author profiles, tips from agents, and advice from publishers, Writing Magazine is a great way to get you started, or back in the saddle, with writing of any genre. Discover how to beat writer's block, develop a character, write for children, or choose a genre. It's all there in every issue.
Writing Magazine have provided an exclusive discount for listeners of Always Take Notes. Download their digital magazine and try their introductory subscription offer at 3 issues for just $4.99, worth £18. You can claim this offer online and the link is in the show notes.
As a subscriber, you also benefit from discounted entry into their monthly writing competitions, which is a great way to practice your skills and potentially win cash prizes and publication in their magazine.
Offer ends 31st of January 2022. Hello and welcome to Always Take Notes. In this episode, Rachel and myself spoke with journalist and author Gary Younge.
We spoke to Gary about his career at The Guardian, his acclaimed non-fiction books, and his decision to enter academia.
It's a great episode and we hope you enjoy it. Gary, it's great to have you on Always Take Notes. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I wanted to start out by asking about your entry to journalism in the early 90s, and particularly getting this Scott Trust bursary at The Guardian. So how did you find out about it, and what was the process of applying, and what drew you to do
that? I read about it in the paper. I was a daily reader. It was my final year of university. I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly. I knew I didn't want to go into the corporate world. Thought I might do teaching as a foreign language or something like that. But I had done some journalism for the Scotsman, and I'd enjoyed it. And I got paid a little bit. And it was the first thing that I'd really done and enjoyed that I'd got paid for. I was training to be a translator. But that training had got me into sort of words and much more into words than talking about other people's words. And I was very politically involved. So I saw it in the paper. I noticed that it said something to the effect of kind of specifically inviting people from ethnic minorities and other underrepresented backgrounds. And that did just make me think, okay, so they will not freak out when you turn up then, because that is just a common experience of a range of things, up until then, looking for flats or whatever, that somehow posting that made a difference. I think you had to write a short article about someone of interest in your area, and then, fill in the forms. And I got an interview, and I was interviewed by, among others, Alan Rusbridger. And the funny thing that I remember about the interview is coming down on the train. I was studying in Scotland, in Edinburgh. Coming down on the train, my image of a journalist, certainly a student journalist, a young journalist, was someone who was so hungry and so for this, that kind of give me it, like this is all I've ever wanted to do. I've wanted to be a journalist since I was 5, and that just wasn't me. I mean, I was interested in journalism. I was kind of interested in what journalism could do. I really wanted the bursary because I had no other. My mother died when I was 19 and my dad left when I was 1, so I had no other sort of parental support. Whatever I did next was kind of going to be on my own. There was not like, well, I'll go home and chill for a bit. And so on the way down, I was thinking, you've got to say, if they say, what will happen if you don't get this bursary? You've got to say, I'll die. Like, I must have it. It's my life. And I got in the room, and of course they did say, what will you do if you don't have the bursary? And I just completely shat the bed. I said, there was a long pause, and I just said, I'll do something else. I said, I'll do something else. I'll probably teach abroad. This gives a sense of the time. I said, it doesn't cost much to write something down and put a stamp on an envelope and send it somewhere, which is how news or articles were delivered at the time. I'll just do something else, because I can't do this without the money. And the whole time just thinking, shut up, it's the wrong answer. And it actually was the right answer, as it turned out, because the bursary scheme is to encourage people who would otherwise not be journalists. And a number of very kind of good people have come through there. The two of the Guardian leader writing team at the moment came through the bursary scheme. Hannah Poole, who runs the Bernie Grant Arts Centre, Anushka Stana, who was the head of the lobby, one of the heads of the lobby, is now going to work with Peston. So over the years, there's been Lanre Bakre, kind of too invidious to mention them all, but actually quite a lot of good people have come through there.
I read somewhere as well that in that interview you said that you fancied being a columnist. Was that just a easy, straightforward answer, or was there something that genuinely appealed to you about being a column writer?
Oh, no, that's true. I mean, I was, first and foremost, I was politically engaged. I was vice president of my student union, I was very active in the anti-apartheid movement, Labour. So I was... I had nothing if not opinions. I was all about the opinions. And I was asked, what kind of job would you like if you were on The Guardian? And I said, I'd like a job like Hugo Younge. And one person said, well, there's only room for one Hugo Younge at The Guardian. And I said, well, why wouldn't that be me? Which... sounds a bit twatty now because I actually did end up being a columnist, but then it was the equivalent of wanting to play polo for England, or it was and so my point was, no, I get that, it's a long shot, but somebody's got to do it, haven't they? And I was sufficiently aware about what class confidence could do to know that there would be people who would go in there and just say, yeah, but that's my job. So I wasn't trying to show off, but it sounds like that now, actually.
Could you take us to those early years at The Guardian? So what you were doing in your initial years on the paper, but also explain a bit about what the institution was like at that time in the early 90s, how big it was, how its level of kind of resourcing compared to today. And then also, when did the internet, I suppose, begin as a kind of glimmer on the horizon?
Yeah, so it reminded me of, I got my bursary in 92, so I did some work experience in 92, 93, and then started doing shifts in October 93. And it struck me, my first impressions were it was like a very, very messy middle-class person's living room or drawing room. Just papers everywhere, total fire hazard, people kind of scruffy. Some people bought their pets in. Nancy Banksmith used to bring a farting dog in. A bit eccentric. And what became clear to me as a kind of young person trying to make my way through it is that it was quite porous. So you could go up to someone and say, oh, I think I've got an idea, And so my feeling was, so long as I had a reason to go back into the office, then you could kind of wander about and ply your wares. Sign of the times is that I started my shifts in Guardian Europe, which obviously has long since gone, wouldn't make much sense now, but which was a kind of constellation of partner papers from around the continent. And then there was a little team of us who would translate, go through the foreign papers, so Liberation, Neue Deutsche Zeitung, Süddeutsche Zeitung, whatever, find articles that we thought would work if they were translated into The Guardian, and then translate them. And then every now and then we would write our own article, but mostly that's what we were doing. And it was very white. I mean, lily white, almost. Like, put a polar bear in there, you're not going to find it. White. And quite posh. Not mean posh, just regular posh. Just middle-class folk, upper middle-class folk, I guess. I mean, this is all very impressionistic. And there was... It felt like there were a series of cantons. It felt a lot looser now than it is now. A series of cantons where each kind of place doing kind of their own thing, really, and trying to kind of keep it together in some kind of coordinated way towards the top. And I would say a bigger ideological variation, even at higher levels. So there were people like Victoria Britton or Seamus Milne was there and was, relatively senior within the organisation, although he continued to be for quite a time. Richard Gott, who later got kind of fingered for being a communist Soviet spy. Richard Norton Taylor, Georgina Henry. So there was more, as well as just kind of regular liberal folk. So there was kind of quite an ideological variation. And I guess indicative of that sort of porousness was that Alan Rusbridger, who was deputy editor at the time, I came in just after G2 was introduced. So it was kind of, there was a feeling there of kind of being market leaders in terms of kind of innovation and so on. But Alan was reading, I think, New York Review of Books or something, and he could see that in South Africa, in a run-up to the election, there were stories that white journalists couldn't get. But he kind of, by the very nature, didn't know what they were, and so he wondered if I was interested in going and staying in a township for a little while. And kind of the piece that I did as a result of that, where I got in with Mandela's bodyguards and I followed him around, had this kind of ringside seat on history. I was like 25, so it was all like, oh, look, there he is. I did a piece called The Black Knight, and that's what got me my job.
By that point, did you feel pretty confident reporting and assembling material and doing all of that research, or did you feel sort of like you'd been thrown in the deep end in a good way?
Yeah, no, I was way out of my depth. I do not mind admitting. No, I didn't really... I mean, I knew I'd been to the city, and I knew not to make stuff up. I knew not to steal other people's work. But the kind of craft of gathering and assembling, and I was kind of learning on the job. And it felt like quite a high wire act, actually. The first day, as it turned out to be the only day that I was kind of, I was the super junior, like, scrappy-do person in the office. And they went, there was some day when they said, well, Gary, you do the news today, And it was all kind of kid gloves. And anyway, I still completely fucked it up. Just kind of got, just fucked it up. Because I didn't know what I was doing.
Do you recall how so?
Yeah, there were talks between Inkatha and ANC and the election kind of board, something about participation or not participation. And somehow I had figured out, I didn't make it up, it was on a wire somewhere, that they'd reached an 11th hour compromise. And we ran with that. And they had not reached an 11th hour compromise. And the story the next morning was about how it all crashed and burned, apart from in The Guardian. So, I think I was told, oh yeah, that news agency, yeah, they're not very good. And anyway, I just didn't know. So it was, I would say for about the first 3 years, like my heart was always in my mouth when a piece was coming out. What have I done? Where's this gonna go? What mistake did I make? Not confident at all, to answer your question. No.
Could you tell us about then the experience of going to America for your Lawrence Stern Fellowship in the mid-1990s? Had you spent appreciable time in the US before that? And what was your encounter with like both American society and American journalism?
No, I'd been on my first encounter with America was changing planes in Miami on my way to Barbados with a friend. Barbados, where my folks are from. We missed the connection, so we had to stay in Miami for a night. And all we knew about Miami was Miami Vice. And we were too freaked out to go downtown, so we spent the whole day in the airport, which actually was quite an education in itself, but, pretty crazy. And then the next time I went for a week to New York, and then I applied for the Lawrence Stern Fellowship and got it. And that is a fellowship that allows one young British journalist to go and work during the summer at the Washington Post. It's named after an Anglophile, the late Anglophile Lawrence Stern. But I'd always been, and I remember writing in my application, up until now, I've pretty much had to sink or swim. And I've managed to get to the shore, but I've taken in quite a lot of water. That's what I wrote in the application. And so I wanted, and this was a really blissful and I think really kind of key moment in my development as a journalist in particular and a writer in general, because it was like, I don't know, some kind of university course or something where you could do as much or as little as you liked. And you just wrote your own ticket, really, and they were well-resourced. There were people in the office who knew Larry, and so there was a real affection for the fellowship as well as a desire for it to kind of succeed. And, you'd find a story in Denver, and they'd say, you want to take 2 days and see the Rockies, and I went down to Louisiana to do a story, and they would give me restaurant recommendations. I mean, it was they really wanted you to have a good time. It gave me the time and the space to develop my writing, as opposed to just thinking each new thing is the next new crisis for me. And there is something about American journalism, I would say particularly magazine journalism, but even some of its best newspaper journalism, which is really edifying, I think. To some degree about rigour, but also about kind of trying to find that, going the extra mile to find that piece of colour, because that piece of colour will really make the thing pop. And really kind of, there was a lower level of metabolism there, slower metabolism. And so, unlike in Britain, where they would say, Gary, we want 700 words on this by 7, and then the next morning, all the other papers have done the same story, you've got to do it that day. It just wasn't like that there. And so you would have a conversation with the editor about what you should look for. And then you would make a lot of calls, and then you would go back to them before you went out to do the reporting. And then you would go out to do the reporting, and you would call in and tell them how it's going, and they would kind of guide you, maybe you want a bit more of this or a bit more of that. And then you would come back, and then you would talk through the story again, and then you would write it, and then it would be edited, and then you would get it back. As opposed to, when I do my column, at The Guardian, I think most British newspapers are like this, quite often the editing process was, I had very good subs and very good editors, but I would call on Wednesday, say I'm thinking of doing this. They'd say, great. Then I'd do it. Then I'd send it. Then I would call and say, any queries? And you can go, any queries for Gary? No, you're good. You're good. Thanks. And so to have this infrastructure for 3 or 4 months was actually kind of, it was paradigm shifting because it made me think about what I was doing in a much more considered and reflective way. I mean, there's also lots of criticisms I could make, but like, it was very important to me.
And while you were there, was that when you did the travel and the research for No Place Like Home?
No, what happened was while I was there, I met and fell in love with an American. Then I had to come back. I wrote a piece there, right at the end, about being black in America, being black and British in America. They got a lot of attention. Jane Bradish Ellams from Curtis Brown wrote to me and said, would you like to write a book about this? And I thought that was the most effective way for me to get back and see my then girlfriend. And so I said yes. But then it took me like 6 months to actually figure out how to do a book proposal. And then I did. So it wasn't then that I did the research. I did the research about 8 months later. It was while I was there that I saw enough to understand what my fascination with America is. So without that stay, I wouldn't have had the book.
And when did you first get into column writing? I mean, that's something that was a kind of consistent, part of your career at The Guardian. When did you get into it? How did it come about? And then over the years, how did you develop your method and your process for writing columns?
Well, it came about in 1999 in the wake of the Macpherson report. And that was no accident. And that's an awful lot of things happened around then. Zadie Smith's White Teeth came out. Yasmin Abai Brown got her column. Steve McQueen won a Turner Prize. And it was this kind of... And the year before, Chris O'Feely won a Turner Prize. And I put it down, this kind of moment of kind of New Labour through to 9/11, where there was this kind of... this pent-up series of kind of conversations and engagements that people had wanted to have, but had been pretty much kind of nullified or suppressed under a Tory government. But then, even though I think New Labour was awful about immigration, actually not great on race, there was an opening up. There was a flowering, and which was down to their existence. And I mean, it pretty much, I felt it closed down after 9/11, and that's when the kind of retreat against multiculturalism and all that kind of happened. But that's when I got it, and that's why I got it, I think. I mean, I'd written the odd column before then. I don't think it was a bizarre idea. I was quite a opinionated writer, so I'd written a few leaders before then. Nothing huge, not the main leader usually, but I'd written a few. So I was kind of, it wasn't completely absurd, but I felt, and my process changed. So really due to circumstances. So I felt I was 30, and I just thought, you don't know enough to write a column, which I kind of think was true. But what you can bring to this is energy. And so I would go places. I'd want to write about asylum seekers, and I would find a local asylum seeker story somewhere, and then I would go and I would report, and then I would kind of embed the reporting in the column. And to me, that was a way of... I didn't have enough knowledge or experience. Even now, I'm 52, I could now write, I don't write columns anymore, but I could now write something that kind of links now to the Iraq War, or the first Gulf War, which was 20 years ago. Well, when you're 30, you can't link things to when you were 10. You just don't have the body of work and knowledge and the experience. So I thought, what I can do is hop on a train, make some calls, go see people, and kind of... that can be not my USP. It's not like I was the only person doing that, but most columns aren't written like that. So, and that was my method, and it was quite, if you could call it that, and it was quite difficult because there isn't always a thing that relates to the thing that you want to write about. And it actually, it makes it much more difficult to do when you actually put people in it, because then people have their own agendas and they say stuff, and you've got to kind of incorporate it into an argument. And I carried on doing that in the States. I had a little break when I left for the States. I thought I was going to stop my column, but then I actually wanted to carry it on. And then, and it was every 2 weeks, which makes a big difference actually, because you can always be slightly off the pace. You're not chasing the moment. And I carried doing that in the States, and I was indulged. I was supported in doing that. So I remember when Fahrenheit 9/11 came out, I flew to Ohio, to Akron, which is a swing town in a swing state, to watch it in a little town. Well, not that little, but in a town outside of New York. And, they would be fine with that. Or I would fly to the book opening of a right-wing, kind of evangelical Christian bestseller. And I did that until I had a kid. And then it wasn't that plausible anymore, just to be like, I'm off now, for a couple of days. And then I would say I still did it a fair amount, more than I should have done probably, but it was more like I would do that every other week, or every second column or third column, and the rest of the time you would be doing Obama stuff or Hillary stuff, or kind of, so I was always on the go, so there was no shortage of colour, and it was an interesting kind of tilt in my time in America, that I would say for the first 4 or 5 years that I was there, I was doing what foreign correspondents have done for years, mostly, which is translating America for a British audience. But with the internet and with the growth in American readers, towards the end of my time, and I was there for 12 years, I would say the second half of my time, you were writing as much for a domestic audience as a UK audience. So that became my method. And to be honest, when I came back to Britain, I didn't do a column for about the first 2 years. But once again, for family reasons, if you have a column, it's a known space where you have to write every week, and you can organise your week around it. And I had another kid by then, and so. But there was a lot less travelling by that stage, and a bit more pontificating, which is not exactly what I wanted to do, but what I could do.
A message from our sponsor, Vitsu, Melvin's story.
We love, love, love our Vitsu shelving. Build quality and ease of assembly is amazing, but it was your service that made the whole process such a joy.
So said Melvin from Sydney in this heartfelt message to his Vitsu planner Sophie in London. Love is a word heard a lot at Vitsu. Other verbs just don't seem to cut it. As with any customer, Sophie considered every detail, so Melvin's bookshelves were perfect for his needs. Passionate about good service, she communicates with all her customers directly, wherever they are in the world. Whether in person or on the other side of the globe, Vitsu's planners hold your hand throughout the process, time and again proving that long-distance relationships really do work. Every interaction is handled with love from Vitsu.
Vitsu's 606 Universal Shelving System is a modular, adaptable kit of parts. It can provide the perfect home for your books, and even the desk from which to write one. Visit vitsu.com, that's vitsoe.com, or request a free brochure via email at vitsu.com by quoting ATN 606.
Vitsu, makers of long-living furniture by Dieter Rams.
Could we talk about one of the articles that you sent over to us, She Would Not Be Moved, and how you came to report that piece? I was really interested to see that you said that Claudette Colvin's story was out there, but no one had bothered to interview her before. How did you go about getting that access?
Claudette Colvin was ejected from the bus in Montgomery before Rosa Parks, and she was going to be the one. And then she got pregnant, and she kind of fell out of the history books more. Well, she didn't fall out of the history books, but she fell out of the limelight. And she became like this asterisk, really. And I guess, and this speaks a little bit to the previous question, because this wasn't so much an MO for column writing, but for general reporting. My feeling was that you really want to be where other people aren't, not just so that you can show off, but because if everybody's in Grant Park on election night, then there's really not, what are you adding by being in Grant Park in Chicago on election night when Obama's won? Like, obviously it's lovely to see and all of that, but you could actually watch it on the telly probably more effectively. And so I would much rather be in a bar on the south side of Chicago with African Americans, kind of just trying to see how they are kind of consuming it. And that has generally been my, if there's a method, that's generally been it, or an MO anyway. It's like, well, where are they all going? Okay, well, I'll kind of go over there. And not for no reason, it should be a reason, but the 2016 election I spent in Middletown, in Muncie, Indiana. 2008 I was in Roanoke, Virginia, just kind of not places where other people were. And I like to go to those places and then stay for a while. So coming back to Claudette Colvin, I'm always interested in the asterisks. And would like, well, what happened to her? And that was when I was doing my first book. I went down to Montgomery and I would ask people, so what happened to her? And people were like, oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. And one woman had a number and was actually kind of quite vivid about it. And she gave me this number and I called it when I got back. And I went backwards and forwards with, I think it was Claudette's cousin, for about a year. And I'd gone back to England by then. And then finally I think I got her address and I wrote her a letter. And she wrote me back. And to be honest, there's an awful lot of stories around race. Actually, it's not just around race, but race is actually provides quite a good example. That are hanging around, waiting for someone to write. That are that people don't see the value in for whatever reason. And that you can kind of pick up and run with. And this was one. And I didn't discover Claudette, but I don't remember there being any other big pieces about her before mine. There might have been. I might even have read them and forgot. But kind of there might not have been. And if there weren't many. Yeah, that was just kind of sheer bloody-minded persistence, really. That I really, really wanted to know who this person was. There's no decent history book that would leave her out. But there was also no history book that would spend any time on her. And the ones that spent any time at all on her got most of it wrong. Yeah, so I was it's the kind of thing I feel kind of driven and kind of compelled to do, really.
Can you tell us a bit about the rest of your book writing in terms of, it's been a pretty prolific element of your life for you. How have those projects come about and how have you fitted them together with your newspaper commitments?
Well, some of them have been organic. That one was organic. I'd been to the South. I discovered this latent interest in the South, and then and then was this idea of, being black in America, and I thought, this would be a way to do it. The second one, so they're all a bit different. The second one, originally I'd wanted to do a story about travelling through Europe, and I've been trying to find a way to do it. I studied French and Russian university. I spoke German. Europe had always been of interest to me. I was trying to find like a kind of maybe to emulate a Grand Tour or something like that, and I just couldn't come up with the thing that would work. And in the process of talking about it with Mary Mount at Penguin, she said, well, it's identity that you're really interested in. Why don't you write a book about that? Which I thought would be much easier, but actually it was really, really hard. That was like passing a huge stone writing that book. It was hard. And then the next sort of proper book about Martin Luther King's speech was, I'd interviewed the guy who wrote his speech twice, and it came to me one day when I was cycling up the Lakeshore Drive in Chicago that actually this could be a book. This would be a good thing to do. Bad timing because my wife was about 6 months pregnant at the time, but kind of I managed to kind of make it work with my commitments. And then my most recent book about all the kids who got shot dead in one day, I came from a magazine article of the same theme. And when I was doing it, I thought this could be a book, but I need the time to be able to do it. I mean, gun stories are never very far away in America, and my American agent, Francis Cody, called me after guns were an issue and said, would you, or actually Johnny Geller called me and said, Francis has been on the phone, she wants to know if you've got a gun book in you. And I just said, well, there's this. And it's a 2-line idea, which are kind of quite often the best ideas, really. And they both got it immediately. And that was how that one came up. And the thing of weighing it with my other commitments, in 2007 when my son was born, there was a realisation I'm not going to be able to carry on doing this in the same way. And I came back to England and I said to Alan, Alan Rusbridger was the editor then, I think I'm going to need to go because I've been in America for 4 years, so you're probably going to bring me back anyway, but my wife's American, so I'm probably not going to come. And I've got a kid, so I can't do the running about stuff that I did before. So why don't we... And I want to teach, I want to write books, I want to do other things. And he said... And my idea was after the next election, 2008, didn't know Obama was going to do that then, but after the next election, why don't we manage my departure rather than getting a call from you just when I'm about to board a plane to go on holiday saying you've got to come back in 6 months. And he said, well, or you could just do your column every 2 weeks, teach if you want to teach, write books if you want to write books, and just be on the other end of the line, which I could not say no to. That was a very generous offer, and that's how all of the other books happened beyond the first one. The first one I got 6 months unpaid leave for, but all the other books happened because of that.
Was that kind of long days then, or could you fit how much time were you spending on each kind of project?
Yeah, it changed. So with the first book, no kids, partner working, my then girlfriend's working at Washington Post. She'd go to work. I would sit down and, write about 2,000 words a day about my already structured travel, with notes and all the rest of it. And basically kind of got it done within 4 months. 7 if you count the travelling. The second book, a baby arrived in the middle and really just threw me off, actually. And I didn't know how to do it, so it was kind of about a year and a half late. And it's probably one of the reasons why it was so hard. By the fourth one, I'd figured something out, which was, it's very, very rare that you're going to have the time to sit down and just write 2,000 words uninterrupted. So, look at your diary, figure out where the times are, and gun it when you have the time. And the rest of the time, so with the book on Another Day in the Death of America, my daughter had just been born. She was, a few months old. And so I would print a picture of a kid every day, and I'd think, I know I'm going to have to describe their face. So I'd print a picture each day, and each day that I was full-time parenting, I would just describe a face. That was it. And that way, I was always, so long as you're always working, so long as then you don't feel like, oh, fuck, I've got to get back to that book. What was I doing? You're still very much kind of engaged. Most of them have involved. The speech was the only one that didn't, because the speech, all the reporting and the reading had kind of already been done. The others all involved bouts of travel, 2 days, 3 days, sometimes 4, going to look for people, going to find people, particularly for the last book. Finding, reporting. And then writing kind of catch as catch can. But I think if I was writing another book now, it would be different again. One of my kids is 14, the other one is 8. My life is a lot more regular now. But it was all about kind of fitting it around kids, really. Parenting.
In terms of race being this consistent theme that you've interrogated in your writing, have you ever felt a kind of temptation to strike out and do anything completely different, or any risk of being pigeonholed as that? And I suppose the other thing that I thought was very interesting, one of the pieces that you sent over, was this line that you said, "Whenever I've written about police killings, at least one reader reminds me that black people are most likely to be killed by black people. This is both true and irrelevant." So I suppose just your feelings about having developed a career in this area, and what the response is like, that kind of whole piece.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is, I feel like I do kind of write about lots of other things. I write about left-wing politics, imperialism. I spent best part of a couple of years writing about the Iraq War, American politics. And a couple of times I did an inventory, because people, I know, I'm not saying that you're saying this, but people say, why do you write about race all the time? And it usually kind of panned out to be about 15 or 20% of the time, actually. And that was the most generous kind of interpretation, because an awful lot, like, nobody says, if you're writing about Boris Johnson, why are you writing about white people? If you're writing about the Tory party, why are you writing about white people? So kind of, there's an awful lot of times when you're writing about, I don't know, Obama or whatever, when you're not actually writing about race, you're just writing about the president. And my feeling was always that race is a thing that I'm interested in, and it is a legitimate area of scholarship and concern. And so I will pursue that. And race is not the only thing I'm interested in. And interestingly, my fight was always to be able to write about race among other things. That there were people who would say, don't do that because you'll be pigeonholed. And there were people who would say, you can only do that. So my first column was actually about Bosnia, but it was spiked because they said, we don't really need you for that. We need you for the black stuff. And so the struggle was to actually be able to kind of write about what was of interest to me. And my I have about 2 pieces of grandfatherly advice to young journalists. And one to young black journalists is, do what you love. If you love sport, write about sport. If you love fashion, write about fashion. You don't have to write about the politics of race but if you do want to write about that, write about that. Write about whatever you love that you can get paid for, because that will be the best stuff that you write. And you'll still be black. Your perspective will come through. You don't have to announce it with every piece. Basically, you don't have to kind of do what I've done, which is kind of has been to be kind of unapologetically insistent on writing about kind of racial issues. But you do have to do what you want to do. And people will, as they have with me, constantly try to blow me off what I wanted to do, because there was an imagination that kind of maybe this either wasn't good for me or just wasn't good. And I interviewed Chris O'Feely, and I talked to him about that, and he said, well, pigeons can fly, about being pigeonholed. And I think kind of I respect the question. I do, because it's a reasonable question. It's also true that kind of white journalists would never get asked the question about why they always write about white people. They just wouldn't be. And And I get, and you know, I get how that is and why that is. And I kind of, I feel that it's a legitimate area of inquiry. And it would be a real problem if I was writing the same thing over and over and over again. But, you know, I just interviewed Lewis Hamilton. It was really interesting. And I brought a lot of my knowledge to that. That was kind of quite a different interview and different skill set to when I interviewed Mia Mottley, who's the Prime Minister of Barbados, and different again to kind of Maya Angelou. And so it's Toni Morrison who said, like, it's not a limiting place to come from. Which doesn't mean that you might not write about it in a limiting kind of way, but that's true of everything. And so I guess... And this is a kind of, I mean, it's a question because it raises some really interesting philosophical challenges, right, for me, which is it doesn't challenge them, but it raises the challenges, which is of freedom, the freedom to be who you want to be and not to be defined by other people's expectations, and to shape your own voice and interest, because people will, even the term or the terminology, you know, you could be pigeonholed, you might be pigeonholed, or you might be typecast if you're an actor. They're all in a passive voice. It's all about somebody doing something to you, as opposed to you actually asserting yourself on the world. And so it has that has been a challenge, and I honestly I'm grateful for the challenge, because it has forced me to reckon with what I do and why, you know. And I've been in journalism now for 26 years, and when I started with my column, but certainly when I started, like, at The Guardian, there were so few black voices that there wasn't actually a way of not being defined one way or another. Just to step into the room was to be framed in some way, because you were, was it that Shonda Rhimes talks about first, only, and different? I mean, not quite the first, but you know what I mean. So, it raises really interesting and important points about kind of the degree to which we can be free as writers to pursue our interests and to kind of challenge expectations. That, I mean, to be honest, it's been worse for me in television. Not that I don't like doing television very much, and I don't do it very often, but that there's something kind of quite often that's quite crude and crash bang wallop about television. And so people would kind of come up to you and go, so what are you interested in? And I would say, Ireland, socialism, how about guns or gun crime? And I'd say, no, not really. No. Really? What about jungle? And you could see that they had this kind of really... they had this fucking list, and if you were going to venture off this list and say, well, actually, I'm really interested in neoliberal globalization and how it's shaping the world, it'd be like, well, we don't fucking need you for that. My experience is that hasn't actually gone away. You know, I'm 52 now. I think having written a range of books, all of which kind of do deal with race, but deal with lots of other things as well, I still I'm still met with often a very sort of limited purview of what I might do.
Well, that was my next question, really, was as you've moved away from The Guardian into academia and you look back over your sort of career thus far, whether things have improved or whether they've sort of remained at an impasse.
They've definitely improved. No doubt, just in sheer numbers they've improved, and they've improved in the way, that things on the outside have improved and not improved. You know, it's not a linear progression. Not everywhere's improved in the same way. You know, so yeah, I think things have improved in the media and in publishing. Obviously, there's still a long way to go, but also an awful lot of those improvements, the improvements aren't even, and they're not secure. So, there's no saying next. Do you know what I mean? What happens next? And of course, those aren't the only things that are changing, right? So kind of, we also have this proliferation thanks to new technology, which removes the barriers, but kind of diversifies and kind of dilutes the audience. It's a very, very different scene. On balance, I would say that things have improved, and they're nowhere near where they would need to be for anyone to be comfortable.
We're coming up against our time limit, but just one final question from me. We ask everyone on the podcast about money and how it's interfaced with their writing lives. Now, be as candid or as guarded as you'd like to be, but for your time, both when you were kind of full on at The Guardian and then when you've been doing other things, how have you made it work, and how have the different elements of your work, your portfolio, kind of work together with your income?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's a reason why I stayed at The Guardian for 26 years and then moved into academia, right? There are some people, I would look at people who are freelancing and I'm scared for them. My mum, when we were going to university, she didn't go to university, but she was a teacher, so she had a teaching certificate. If there had been a degree in plumbing, she'd have said, do that, you get a good job doing plumbing. Like, there's a reason why I was trained to be an interpreter. Why my brother, who ended up running the Travel Channel in America, why he studied mining geology, it was about security and jobs. And if you don't grow up with much money, one response to that is to want stability. And so The Guardian, moving from The Guardian to Manchester was about kind of always having a paycheck, even before I had kids, about always having a paycheck. And then that's combined with another thing, which is always wanting to be able to tell your boss to go fuck themselves, which is about having a sense of financial security and that, or being able to walk away from your security, actually. And so I guess money was never not important. It's always been important. And it's never driven me. It's never been the primary. I genuinely don't have much of an interest in getting rich. I wouldn't mind being rich. I wouldn't mind getting rich, but I'm not very interested in the kind of process of doing that. And I would much rather be interested and engaged. But I need to know that there'll be a shirt on my back and a roof on my head and food in my stomach for as long as I can see. I'm deeply, it's one way in which I'm deeply conservative. And the other thing for me is kind of trying to draw a clear red line between, because I'm still politically engaged, there are things that I don't want money for and that I want to do because they're important to me and because I think they're important for the world, and it's a way of being a free person. And then there are things that I really do want money for. It's like, that's my time, that's time away from my kids, that's time away. And so making that distinction between what is important for me, either politically or for community engagement or whatever it is, I'd say 80% of the time it's obvious. It's about 20% of the time when it's not.
I guess the last sort of question, what next? More books? I mean, I know you're still doing some journalism alongside your teaching, but is there anything in particular that you'd like to take on as a project that now you've got a bit more breathing space to do it? you'd like to?
Yeah, well, to almost, not exactly contradict, but to build on the question that Simon asked before. So I didn't fully answer your question about Manchester, and my move to Manchester was partly a decision I made when Alan said that thing in 2007. Just give us your column, and I thought, and this is just the way I think. I thought, yeah, I could die here. This would be a nice place to die at the Guardian. This would, and that was a way of liberating me from trying to leave. And then, for reasons that aren't necessarily kind of interesting or pertinent, I'd had enough there, and I was like, I really don't want to die here. Actually, I want to die somewhere else. And I also don't want to die like this. Meaning, I wanted to do longer pieces that could say a bit more and that I could take more time on, which is what I'm trying to do. So if you look at my output now, as opposed to kind of one piece a week or one piece every 2 weeks, it's more like kind of once every 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And it's usually about 4,000 words or 3,500 words. And it's not that I feel I deserve that, but that's what I want to do. And if I can find places to do that, then great. The thing that I'm interested in doing research on is Black Europe, the Black presence in Europe since the Second World War, and that's something that I've been interested in for a while. And going back to that conversation with Mary Mount, where she said, "Well, maybe this is about identity," but actually I've always, like I said, I studied French and Russian, and I kind of got so it'd been percolating for a long while, and I kind of got the idea reading Tony Jutt's post-war Europe, and thinking, I wonder what it would be like to do this kind of panoramic thing about Black Europe. And so then started looking and noodling, and then you find all these fantastic Claudette Colvin type stories that are just out on the street. And then Afropean came out by Johnny Pitts, which I thought was great, and made me want to do it more. It wouldn't be the same thing at all. And so I'm working on and working out that at the moment, what that would be exactly, how I would do that.
Brilliant. Well, look, Gary, thank you for being such a fantastic guest and always take notes, and wishing you all the best with your projects going forward.
That was the Always Take Notes interview with Gary Younge. He's on Twitter @GaryYounge. He has a website, and his latest book, published in 2016, Another Day in the Death of America, was published by Guardian Faber.
We wanted to draw your attention to our crowdfunding page on Patreon. If you've been enjoying Always Take Notes, please do consider supporting us there. It helps us to keep the podcast going.
If you support us on Patreon, you can get a great selection of rewards, including a shout out on the show and a selection of successful magazine pitches. Thanks to our latest donor, Chelsea Long.
If you pledge $10 a month, you get a free 2-month trial to Otter worth $26 alongside the other rewards. Otter offers automated transcription and live note-taking for in-person and virtual meetings. I found it to be a huge help when organising interview material. You also get access to a series of mini episodes from previous guests on the show, in which they answer 3 revealing questions. The latest episode features Val McDermott, and here's a snippet.
The one piece of advice I wish I'd had at the beginning of my career was to edit. Edit all the time. Edit as you go along. Edit at every point. Rewriting is where the magic happens. I used to be a journalist, and my plan was always to get it down on paper.
Hello, it's us again. Simon, what was your main takeaway from the interview with Gary?
I enjoyed talking to Gary a lot, actually, particularly hearing about his way into journalism, at The Guardian in the 1990s, and how he sort of made his way there, built a really big profile for himself, and then made this conscious decision to move out and away from The Guardian, which I think is a pretty rare thing to do. Clearly someone who wanted to be reinventing himself and moving on to doing new and different things. Rachel, what about you?
Yeah, likewise, really enjoyed talking to Gary. I particularly liked hearing about how he finds sort of lesser covered subjects, both in history and, reporting on an election from a bar rather than on the sort of main election events. Sort of an obvious thing to do in some ways, and at the same time not practiced by that many journalists. So I think it's reaped real dividends for his work. What have you been up to?
What have I been up to? I have been hanging out in hospitals more for this 1843 story about...
Do you have more blood-spattered notebooks?
I didn't get splattered, but there definitely was quite a lot of blood. But it's been fine. I mean, it's been really fascinating actually. So yeah, I was in last week. I'm not this week because the people I'm writing about are away for half term, but I'll be back in next. So I'm working on something for the LRB actually this week, so a little bit different. What about you, Rachel?
I'm covering for a colleague this week, so juggling a few balls. But yeah, nothing major to report since our last interview.
And we should say also that Rachel has some exciting personal news in that she has got engaged. So many congratulations to her and to her fiancé, James.
Thanks very much. Yeah, if I was the heroine of a Jane Austen novel, my story would end now, but sadly not.
Anyway, this has been Always Take Notes, hosted by me, Simon Acombe.
And me, Rachel Lloyd.
Our producer and social media editor is Artemis Irvin. Our graphic design is by James Edgar, and our score is by Jess Danheiser.
If you'd like to follow us on social media, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Always Take Notes, on Twitter at Take Notes Always. If you'd like to support us on our crowdfunding page on Patreon, please do. We're under Always Take Notes. And if you'd like to leave a review on iTunes or get in touch with us on our website, that would be great too.
Many thanks. Goodbye.